Elizabeth Petersen, Director of the South African Faith and Family Institute.
I am Bongile Mawawa Mose, an Injoli, a leader of African traditional religion.
The honor of women and children is the foundation of a healthy society.
The Talmud says to destroy one life is to destroy an entire world, and to save one life is to save a world. And if there is one woman or one child out there anywhere in South Africa that is harmed in any way, that means the whole world has been destroyed.
Our sacred teachings implore us to take care of women and children and firmly uphold the principle of gender equality.
To violate the most vulnerable members of our society is to spit in the face of God.
In all congregations, there are survivors and perpetrators.
It is our moral responsibility to reflect seriously on how we can support the struggle of women and children for full dignity in our homes, in our communities, and in our religious institutions.
To treat each other with respect.
We cannot turn a blind eye to domestic violence, and we cannot deny that it exists.
And we call on religious leaders from all faiths to support survivors, hold perpetrators fully accountable, and offer the possibility of healing for them too.
We as people of faith need to break the silence on violence against women and children.
I call upon all faith leaders to step into true leadership on this issue.
As people of faith, we take a stand.
As people of faith, we take a stand.
As faith leaders, we take a stand. Will you?
Will you?
Will you?
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. Today's program we call the Healing Circle. Today is Friday, October 14th, 2022, and so fortunate and pleased to have that introductory video of Dr. Elizabeth Petersen, who's joining us today from South Africa. South Africa Faith and Family Institute. She'll tell us about that. I want to first of all welcome our friend, our team today, and begin by saying hi to my writing partner, Brenda Lyle-Gray. Brenda, good to see you again from yesterday. And then bring in Dr. Bravada, Garrett-Akinsanya.
Good seeing you.
Dr. Oliver Williams and Dr.
Hi, Dr. B.
Petersen as well. And we call this the Healing Circle, and we've created a process. I'm learning a process at the instruction of Dr. Bravada, Garrett-Akinsanya, a protocol for how we should engage each other. And I always begin and enjoy beginning by asking Dr. B to take us to the ceremony that gets us started, centered, and focused on moving ahead. I want to say that before the show, Dr. Williams announced that one of our previous participants has transitioned, and I'm sure that in the course of today's program, we'll honor and celebrate that leader's transition to the next level. Dr. B, good afternoon. Good to see you. I'm turning the talking stick over to you. And you have to unmute. There we go.
I said, thank you, Baba Al McFarlane, for welcoming us all to the Healing Circle today. I'd like to begin by just talking about why we use this circle and how it came to be in our cultural tradition. The biggest conversations actually happen in a circle. So for African people, in that circle, everyone has equal access to the center, which is the place of power. So the hierarchical nature of the way power is not shared in our American tradition is one that is really, really important in our African tradition. So we start that speaking and our voices in a circle. And although we're not physically in a circle, we can envision spiritually that we are connected in that circle. And we always think about how we honor our elders. And we honor our elders because they're the shoulders we stand on. And we honor our elders because they're closest to our ancestors. And we honor our ancestors because they're closest to our Creator. So as we look at all the paths and the shoulders that we stand on in this sacred space, we also acknowledge the value and gift of the concept of consubstantiation, which means that all living things are connected, that we're connected to each other and the earth and the wind and everything around us. And that means as we enjoy the knowledge of connection, we are never alone. We're always present in a greater I am because we are, and we are because I am. So in this circle today, we also know that our African teachings are very orderly in nature. So we have a virtual talking stick that we pass around the circle. And people can ask for the stick if they have something they need to say. And we begin the conversation by honoring that space. And in this space, as we talk about our Africanness, which is the mother of all creation, we also acknowledge that we're sitting, standing, breathing, and living on land that was nurtured and loved by the Lakota people, the indigenous people of our community. And we also lift them up as we do this sacred time of healing for ourselves and each other and our communities. So that's how we work this healing circle. And today, as we engage with our beautiful sister Elizabeth, who has had a long journey to finally get here, we welcome her to the circle. We welcome her to our family of community, and let her know that she is loved and she's wonderful and beautiful and powerful. And we appreciate her stepping up here today, bringing it all. So with that, I will pass the talking stick to Brother Oliver Williams so that he can once again kind of introduce our sister.
Well, I'm glad to be here today and to see all of your smiling faces and to share with you. And so Elizabeth and I have known each other for a long time. Was it the late 90s or the early 2000s, Elizabeth?
Early 2000s, I think. 2001.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a delegation that came from South Africa to check out the Institute. And we met with them and had a conversation and made a connection. And then Elizabeth went back to South Africa, and then she came back again because she was in a project that the university had through the Humphrey Institute. And she spent time with the university. She spent time with IDVAC. And then Elizabeth went back to South Africa. And I got an invitation to come to South Africa for the 16 days of activism. And we went all over South Africa, talking about the issue of domestic violence. But I got a chance to see all the great work that she does, from Cape Town to Johannesburg to Durban to Soweto to some of the towns that exist, and see that in some places the only persons that are doing work to deal with child abuse, neglect, and intimate partner violence are some of the faith leaders. And we got a chance to go to the American Consulate both in Cape Town and in Durban, and then speak to people about the issue of intimate partner violence, but also to meet a lot of the faith leaders. And each one of them had something to say associated with their particular faith tradition and how they ended up engaging people around their thoughts, as you heard in the video, about how domestic violence is not appropriate. And so it's really wonderful work and very engaging and enriching. And I learned a lot while I was there. So with that, I'd like to welcome my sister, Dr. Elizabeth Hoorn Petersen.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's an honor to be here, and I know, Elle, it's taken a while, but I'm pleased that we are finally here. So thank you for welcoming into this very sacred circle, the healing circle, which is, I think, it's a continuous work for us. And so I also honor my parents. I always say they are my true professors. The ones that I met at university, they are visiting professors. And my parents, my mother and my father, Daniel and Mari Hoorn, they didn't have much formal education, but the extraordinary wisdom, with which they reared us, each one of us, 9 children, have found direction in life. And I think that for me is probably the most important heritage. It's the heritage that they left inside of us. They didn't They don't have anything to leave for us to leave behind in terms of material things. But I think the most important one, I believe, is the one that they left inside of us. And so you're absolutely correct. I also honor the wombs that I come from. You know, the Khoisan wombs, the Xhosa wombs. You know, the women that has carried us actually. And where we've been there maybe for generations before we manifested. And so I believe that we are here at this particular time in the history of humanity to make our contribution, to help heal and flourish. You know, we need to flourish. We can't consistently be just licking our wounds. We have to live. And that's, I guess, that's part of what I would like to contribute. So thank you for this incredible moment. And thank you, Oliver, because Dr. Oliver was really the first person that I met when I first stepped, you know, when I first landed in the States. And so what struck me about him is something that I've always carried in my heart. I always believe in the importance of doing cultural specific work. But I haven't really met anybody. I always said to God, I know that there are people somewhere in the world that has been doing these things. So I don't think I'm the first one thinking about it. So it was incredibly refreshing that the first person that I met was Dr. Oliver Williams. And then it was really incredible, a blessing to finally get him to come when SAFFI, my organization, was celebrating our 10th anniversary. So thank you, Oliver. And thank you also for having me in the States. When was it? In 2019. That was particularly special, you know, because it was the first time that I was actually invited by the African American community. So that for me was absolutely key. So I really thank you so much.
Oh yeah. Well, it was a joy for everyone. She went around the United States, but we went around the United States together. And she presented at a conference that takes place in San Diego. And she knocked everybody's socks off her presentation. And her son.
They're not going to invite me back out. I'm sorry, I come from South Africa. I'm like, gosh,
no,
I'm 50-something now. I can't deal with certain things anymore.
Well, it was pretty great. And her son did a song. And that folk, it was really, you know, when I got to South Africa, she had dinner at her house, and her son Calum does music. It's like your son, Al.
My brother.
Your brother? Oh, that's your brother?
Wayne, yeah.
Okay, boy. Anyway, her son was phenomenal, and he did this song around domestic violence and how to address the issue, and he blended it with not only with the music and the rap, but also with the visuals, the video, and then also the audio where Elizabeth was speaking on it. So it's really great. We'll probably have to play it sometime, you know. So
yeah.
That would be awesome to play it, to listen to it, to audition it. So listen, thank you, Dr. Oliver and Dr. Elizabeth. And what I wanted to do is, I know that Vash has some video or slides maybe to talk about, to show your work, Dr. Elizabeth. And I'd like for you to take the time to explain, you know, more of the background, the vision, the mission, the goals, and the accomplishments of SAFFI. I think the spirit that you've already brought into this conversation is phenomenal, number one, and simply ask us to give more time to understand. And so I want to make sure you have the time because in my point of view, our spirits and our souls seek to connect at that level.
That's right.
So I'm going to ask you to take the talking stick back, Dr. Elizabeth, and talk about whatever's on your mind and about your work and how it connects and how it guides us in community, not only in South Africa, but as human beings around the world. And you mentioned the joy of connecting with the African American by being invited. So I'm curious to talk about how we connect with each other, those of us at home in Africa and those of us Africans who are in other parts of the world, but still see ourselves as Africans. So Dr. Elizabeth, I'm passing the talking stick back to you.
So thank you, Al. This is a conversation and you're going to support me because Oliver knows that I can talk long, right? A lot. So please, please interrupt. And ask me either to move on or to stop.
And we have the protocol that allows us to ask for the stick. So Brenda, I'm sure will say something. I'll come back. Dr. Oliver, Dr. B. So this is a conversation.
Yes, thank you. So SAFFI, I had a sense of my calling when I was very young. And so I always believe that we must nurture children's sense of their calling. So I knew that I was supposed to work with, I guess in my teenage years, it was clear that I'm supposed to work with men who abuse their intimate partners. And I had to work with religious leaders on the faith dimensions of gender-based violence. But of course, the context within which I grew up, I grew up in a Pentecostal church. Most religious leaders, as you know, still today are men. And women are often, not really regarded, weren't encouraged to be leaders. But of course, I'm not a religious leader. I work with religious leaders, come alongside them to strengthen their capacity as they intervene with individuals and families that are affected by gender-based violence. And so SAFFI, so my first year, after I graduated as a social worker, the first job that I had was in a shelter for abused women and children. This was in 1993 in South Africa. And so we're kind of like at the brink of, towards the end of apartheid. And I think the thing that struck me there was the children, because most of the women came with their children into the shelter, and most of them, of course, are Black women. And so I think the thing that really moved me was the fact that it was clear that these children has never experienced a Black man that is not violent and that is not abusive. And the thing that really burdened me was, how are we going to change this? Because you see, I grew up in a home, I already mentioned I'm one of 9 children. And even during the darkest days of apartheid, when we came home from school or from church and we complained about what was wrong in the society, my parents would usually say to us, you are disturbed about whatever is wrong because God wants you to do something about it. So we were always challenged. Yes, it's fine to identify the problem, but because you are so disturbed by it means that God had probably planted something inside of you that would respond to the problem. And so I think, although even in that first job in the shelter, I was completely, I was struggling with my own self-esteem issues. So I struggled. I was the first one going to university. I couldn't speak English properly, all of that. And so I had my own issues, but I was faced with the real trauma of these children and women. And of course, the only thing, of course, I couldn't remember anything that I learned at university. University was traumatic, to say the least. It was a traumatic experience. In fact, one of the only few words that I remembered was a word that I learned in sociology, and it was white supremacy. So that, and I mean, it's interesting. It's like, oh, just after years, I realized, oh my God, that was quite an important word to remember. So anyway, so I think in the shelter, so I started as a social worker, not even 3 years into my being there as a social worker, I was appointed as the director. And so then although I wasn't sent for management training, I knew that I was a leader. And so I just started to begin to implement things. And one of the key things for me was to move the shelter to a place where we get a black man, an African man, to come and work in the shelter. I don't know how it is in the States, but here, still, no man works in the shelter as part of the core personnel, the team, the staff. And I remember saying to God, we must change things here. We cannot have these children grow up with this one particular image of black men. And then it was a journey, because it was about having to convince the mothers that we need a black man, to come and work here. Long short, that gentleman is still working in the shelter, because once we convinced the mothers how important it was in terms of healing us and seeing a different image, I said to God, now you better make sure that we get the proper that we get a proper, man that's not going to come here and mess this whole thing up. Many years later, he's still there. So anyway, so there's a lot of
Let me ask you, Dr. Elizabeth, how did you talk to God, and what did she say back to you?
The point is, for me, it still is. I think, I believe as Africans, it's one and the same. We're not separate. Our sense of God is, in fact, unlike what I think in South Africa and many other places, religion and faith in God is very much used in a particular way. When it suits the oppressor, then God becomes very important. But when it comes to the liberation, the liberating essence of who God is, then no, we can't bring religion in. We can't bring faith in. So I think for me, it's always been, I've never really felt that it's something separate. And it is that sense of knowing and just being guided, really being guided and trusting that the universe actually wants the best for us, wants us to flourish. So anything that is harmful, anything that seeks to confine anyone, that is evil. And that is what, initially I thought it's about resisting, but I realized it's not even resisting, because I feel like with my parents, I saw not that they were so much defiant, sort of placing the energy on trying to resist. It was more of, we're not even engaging this drama. We actually understand our worth. Even though the whole country's constitution was written against our humanity during apartheid, every law, every institution, you had to really, seek for something that would speak life to you. But I think for me, I feel like I've been graced with parents that did not have formal education, but they have extraordinary wisdom, and insight from God. And so this is the essence, for me. So I think that remains my the guiding light. And so anyway, so long short, the shelter was the first part of my work, but it was really setting me up for the critical work of working with religious leaders on the faith dimensions, because what I believe is that our beliefs is actually what governs us, whatever we believe. And so whatever our theology and our belief about the nature of God is, and our theology about what God expects of us in our intimate lives, that is how we will live out our intimate relationships. And so I thought that was obvious, when I first working in the gender-based violence field. I thought, oh, but we should be talking about God, we should be talking about faith and religion and beliefs, and we should be talking about men, if it's men's violence against women. But of course, nobody, don't speak about religion, don't speak about men. And so again, I guess my parents, voices throughout that, God, in fact, chances are that the thing that you have to contribute is unique. So when you see the gap, that is what God is pointing. God makes you see it and make you feel disturbed, uncomfortable. And so even though we may want the leaders to do something, because that's always what I felt, like, why are they? It's like, no, you have to do something. And I must say, so I knew that I had to set up an institution. So, because I also believe in the world that we live with, white supremacist patriarchy really infusing almost every institution that we are born into. We as African people, well, not just African people, but that's my priority. We are either here to help transform existing institutions, or we are here to create new institutions that actually respects the full humanity of African people, because most of these existing institutions that we are all born into does not actually acknowledge the full humanity of African people. And I think that's where a lot of our energy go into. We get to be made to have to protest. We kind of are enrolled in this this treadmill thing, where you always have to fight for something. I'm like, sorry, I didn't come here to fight. Actually, I came here to live. I've got something to contribute. And for me, a key thing about this, and that's why this space is quite, special, because I believe it's about creating sacred spaces for people to find expression. So anyway, so SAFFI then was definitely something that needed to happen. We needed to establish SAFFI. But of course, then humanly speaking, I'm like, I'm a woman, who's going to listen to me? Nobody wanted to speak about faith or religion. What's going to happen? I then did my master's, and because I also used study as a way of trying, I guess it's credibility. How Black people and women always have to find something to put ourselves, in certain spaces. And so, but I was still insecure. And I never forget, I think it was my mother's death, because my mother suddenly died, heart attack, 2007, the first death in our family. And I was struck by, and I was confronted by the question of how much time do I think I have? How much time? Because my mother used to say to us, who are you waiting on? What are you waiting for? And I think my mother's death was, by then, my season at the shelter had really come to an end, and I was in a fix because I knew I had to start this new thing, but it's like, who's going to listen to me? And so, like I said, my mother's death really got me to to ask that question, how much time do I think I still have to wallow in my insecurity, looking for affirmation, looking for a platform? There is no platform. You have to create the platform. You know, there is, and especially if it's something with a slight unique angle. Because yes, people have started to talk in faith communities, but it's always been, I felt it was more kind of like we have to parade Black people's pain. So women have to come and say all the horrible things that has happened to them, and it's like we have to constantly do that. We are called to speak out, but then what? And so the work of SAFFI essentially is about creating safe spaces for faith leaders to critically reflect on the theologies that informs the way we interact with each other in our intimate relationships. That's essentially what. So the focus is on identifying, or encourage faith leaders to talk about and to interrogate easily misinterpreted scriptures and teachings from their own traditions. And then also to ask themselves, why do you keep on preaching those same themes for decades? You keep preaching similar themes that is easily misinterpreted. And people's intimate lives are destroyed by these easily misinterpreted scriptures. Where are the resources within your own faith tradition? And so it's also about waking, faith leaders up to this. It's almost like, you entered into this space and there's these dominant themes around theology and teachings, and you just continue to preach that. But it doesn't serve our people. And so when we begin to identify the resources that is actually also in all of our scriptures, in all of our faiths, let's see what that does for the liberation and the flourishing of people in the intimate relationship. So that's the essence of our work. We do training. We've developed training over the years, and it's very much merged also with research. So it's deeply located in research, academic research, but also praxis. So research and praxis speak to each other. But the main focus is, you are faith leaders. We cannot ask a magistrate to clarify scripture. If a man says, the Bible says, I am the head of the home, women must submit. If a woman, victim survivor, comes and says, but I'm married and we are one flesh, but she knows, and everybody knows, that he's sleeping around, he's sexually violating her. We cannot ask social workers and the police and the magistrates to clarify scripture. It's the sacred responsibility of religious leaders and faith leaders to do that. And so what SAFFI does, or seeks to do, is to create safe spaces. We say we're not here to shame religion. We're not here to shame religious leaders. We are here to say both religious leaders and the secular world or the feminist world, we have to come together because we have unique resources and insights that is absolutely necessary to bring liberation, to people in the intimate relationships.
So, yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that's I thought was so vital and important about the work of SAFFI is that when you showed the video at the beginning, you saw Jewish community, you saw two different groups of Muslims, you saw Hindi, you saw Baha'i, you saw, so there's about nine different faiths that Elizabeth works with, but the same structures exist in each one of those faiths.
Yeah.
And what they do is that the faith leaders will do is to get a chance to have a conversation about what the appropriate ways not only to think about it, but to behave. What's the associated behaviors related to what faith text is saying. What's also interesting is the fact the misinterpretation of it. So I'm, not a preacher, but I play one in the community. And so when Elizabeth was identifying Ephesians 5:22, where it says, "Women, submit yourselves to your husbands," Ephesians also talks about submit yourselves to one another. But it also tells men about how they're supposed to behave towards their partner and what it means to love them and treat them. And violence is not a part of that.
Yeah.
So, quit.
I was just saying, I'm actually sitting here having church myself, and part of it is because I see it even generalizing to not just gender-based violence, but racial-based violence.
That's right.
And how we're in the center of Minnesota. I don't know how many states in America are as white as Minnesota. And so we're like little flies in a buttermilk. They see us. Anything we do is exaggerated if it's bad, or minimized if it's something we do that's good, it's minimized. If we do something that's wrong in our community, it's maximized and magnified. And as you were talking, I was just thinking that's how I formed the African American Child Wellness Institute, out of that same righteous anger, that same lack of attention, the same lack of voice. And what the question I wanted to ask you, this is really a good conversation. The question I wanted to ask you was, I know a lot of Black clergy. I was raised Southern Baptist, my mom and grandma Pentecostal, so I know they're deep into certain ways a woman is supposed to act or man is supposed to act. And as I hear these revolutionary things that you're doing, I know that many spiritual leaders do not come from a background of changing that assumption that women should be owned,
right,
and women should be dominated. And so I want to ask you, how did you find those pastors from various denominations who stepped up, one, believing that women had a right to do anything, and then two, not only that, going out and sharing that wisdom among themselves in denomination? Because I can tell you, when I came to Minnesota from Texas, which is almost as bad as that they're in the open about it, when I came to Minnesota, one of the Black pastors, I talked to him about doing domestic violence work. He said, "Oh, we don't have that at our church."
Yeah.
He's got one of the biggest churches in the whole state. And he said, "Oh, no, we don't have that problem in our state." And I knew he did, because some of his parishioners had come to see me for therapy. Right. So I knew he didn't know what's going on. So please tell me, how did you find them? How did you weed some of the bad ones out? Or did they just change? Please just let inquiring minds know. I just want to have hope. Tell me, sister, how you did it.
I mean, I think for me the key thing is that we each have to find whatever our calling is, and that's what we have to do. And so I really, there's a part of me that has no need for anyone to accept what I have to offer. Mm-hmm. And so but also maybe a step before that is to accept that all of us are casualties of white supremacy and patriarchy. Mm-hmm. And so that links to where we also locate the work of SAFFI. So when SAFFI speaks, we locate the root causes of men's violence against women, gender-based violence, in what we refer to as the Siamese twins of oppression, which is white supremacy and patriarchy. Both those belief systems have captured God in it. White supremacy basically saying, God created white people to be superior to Black people. Patriarchy saying God created men to be superior to women. And so because God created it like that, it is natural. And it is normal you know, for white people to always have to supervise black people because black people are essentially inferior. You know, they created inferior. So the same thing, exact same thing is said about women in relation to men. Therefore, men must always be the leader, always supervise them, because women and black people are unreliable. You know, they're not fully functional, you know, whatever. So when we start our work, I think even that in itself is it's a little bit of a difficult one, even for our black feminist, you know, folk here back home, where people, it's okay for people to speak about patriarchy, but it's really not okay to also bring white supremacy into the mix, you know. And that's what I found. And so basically what SAFFI seeks to do is we talk about the root causes. So firstly, we say that we are all casualties of these oppressive systems of belief. And so, for example, we do an exercise with religious leaders. So even in terms of how we started, so when SAFFI started in 2008, or officially really got off the ground, 2009, we sent out, we trained field workers that were supposed to be facilitators. And then, of course, and we said, start where you are, in your own community. Because remember, none of this work has been done in this way before. So we basically said, let's start where we are. Go and find faith churches or whatever in your community, and then tell them about SAFFI, and then invite them to a sensitizer workshop. So that's the first piece of the work. And what was interesting, as the field workers went out, there were critical questions that these faith leaders wanted to know. They wanted to know, who's the founder? And when they discovered, oh, it's a woman, and then they asked the other important questions, is she married? So it helped them that I was married. And then, of course, it also helped them that I was a social worker. So, you know, so there was these little, you know, credentials I had to, I mean, of course, they didn't know what's the condition of my marriage as long as I was married, right? Patriarchy. I was being covered by a man, which is, you know, was a wonderful man anyway. But so those were very interesting. And then, of course, in the sensitizer workshop, that is where we really show how we all were groomed almost to become either victims or perpetrators through the Sunday school stories. What is the emphasis? Why we focus on certain, you know, certain stories? So there's a theology that is already being shaped in that mind of that child. You know, so by the time you get into an intimate relationship, you already have a very fixed idea of what God requires of you as a woman when you are married, and what God requires of you, you know, of a man when he is married. And so we show that through, you know, whatever happens as we grow up, but we also sneak in those scriptures, the liberating scriptures, the resources that we also heard. You know, we also heard things like, my body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. Anyone who destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. I mean, that's quite a hectic verse, you know. I mean, imagine. So I say to pastors, imagine we started to focus on that scripture. Imagine you stopped preaching this submission, the one that Oliver was referring to. Imagine you stopped using that submission theme at people's weddings, and you started to preach, our bodies are sacred. We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. Anyone who destroys the temple, God will destroy him. Imagine what you know, what would then happen. Of course, also, as Africans, we know that we know what it means to be human. We are only human through each other, Ubuntu, right? If I destroy you, if I harm you, I'm really harming myself. And so, and if I, bless you, I'm blessing myself, and those kinds of things. And so also it's about what are these resources that has been muted. So we bring those kinds of conversations in, and I must say it helps pastors that we are not here to judge them, because really, I mean, I genuinely don't have time and energy for that, because I feel in many ways all of us, have, I say here in South Africa, we've been colonized. So the spirit of colonization, we all have a tendency to want to colonize spaces and other people. So we mustn't just want to take the high ground of, just because we do this work, we don't actually sometimes also invade spaces and colonize, try to colonize people. So I think for me, what is I keep going back to my parents, in the sense that what I've witnessed with them and what I've experienced with them is they have just, and now I see what it was. They just lived Ubuntu by respecting the dignity, the human dignity of every single person, even the perpetrators, and so, and that for me is a key, is very key in even in the work of working with men and working with men who abuse their intimate partners. We must insist on men's humanity. It is a cop-out to just say, oh, he must go to prison. What must he go and do there? I'm not saying that some men or some perpetrators shouldn't be in prison. There's a place for that, but I think there's a cop-out. We don't want to engage with our humanity. Perpetrators reminds us of our own darkness, our own ability to be violent and abusive and that sort of thing. So it's like we want out of sight, out of mind. No, I don't know if that's the line, but you get what I'm saying. And I think the real work, and I believe that is where faith leaders and faith communities, people of faith, have such a crucial role to play. Because if people of faith cannot engage the darker sides of humanity, then we are doomed.
Elizabeth, I wanted to point out a few things too for people to know. Among the things that I was impressed by is the relationship that you have with Desmond Tutu, and the fact that he validated and supported SAFFI in the work that you have done throughout, and also the Anglican Church and all the other, many of the other faith traditions that exist and faith houses that exist in South Africa. The other thing too is, so we went to Johannesburg, and there's a Baba Buntu who is it's, to me, when we went and spent time with him, it was an opportunity to go into a circumstance, but it was like having African American men and African American women, but they were South African men and South African women that ended up having discussions similar to what we would have in the United States. And we had this, when we were doing the men's group, one of the things that I thought was interesting was the fact that the brothers came up with a phrase, "I love being black. Do you love being black?" And the other men would respond, "I love being black. Do you love being black?" And there was an opportunity for us to be able to be thoughtful about it and to have discussions and talk about challenges that exist, but also how you overcome those things to be able to move forward. The other thing that I thought about too is, Elizabeth has a relationship with Shane Price that's in town, and that's right, and Verna, and the similarities is a brother that's in Cape Town who is a pastor, and he's written a book of history about South Africa, but he also does reentry work, similar to what Shane does, and similar to helping men rethink who they are and how they behave and interact in the world. The other thing that I thought about too was the level of diversity that existed. So, we deal with diversity in the United States, but not like I've seen in South Africa. So it's flipped. White folks in South Africa are about 13%. And that's accurate, Elizabeth? About 13% of the population?
You know more, yeah, but more or less, yes.
And then so similar, African Americans, about 12 to 14% of the population in the United States. But we went to different places. We went to this one place, it was in Cape Town, where they had a talent show. And you had different people. So we deal with a lot of differences within the African American community, but not language. And they had to deal with they had to do translations, but people were working together to be able to move to perform together. And also around diversity, one of the things that we went to a few Mandela museums. And one of the things that I heard when we were there was the fact that, Mandela was Xhosa, and that's a large tribe in South Africa. But there's Zulu, which is a large tribe, and one of the largest. And there's so many other things. There was somebody I thought was Samoan, and they were South African, a group of people, And so anyway, when we were at, they were talking about what Mandela said when there was an opportunity and that he was taking over the country. And the Zulus and the Xhosas went to him and said, you need to divide the land up this way. And Mandela said, there's enough for everybody. And so that moved me to see his humanity.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to make those points, that I thought were useful things to be able to discuss as
well. I thank you, Brother Oliver, because hearing you say there's enough for everybody talks about the perspective of plenty versus seeing scarcity.
Yeah.
And when we're in that place of seeing plenty, we recognize that there's still so much harvest and nowhere near enough laborers to do the work in front of us. And I know as we sit here thinking about that healing work that has to come to being, that's been brought forth, that's been birthed through some of our sister Dr. Elizabeth's work, it really reminds me of the fact that every one of us sitting in this circle have been challenged to give birth to work where there still is not enough laborers and too much to be harvested. And I know today we didn't get to talk to Sister Brenda, so I'd like to take just a moment to pass the talking stick to her, because again, she's been working as an educator for decades, and she's got something, I'm sure, to say.
Dr. Elizabeth, I am just really impressed with your work even before We met you personally because Dr. Williams talks about your work all the time. And while you were talking, I thought about something that has never left. Lauryn Hill was a favorite singer of mine, and she got up, I think it was 86, 87, something like that. She had her Bible in her hand, and she said, loving God is not a burden and it's not a contradiction. And I never did forget that. But one thing I'm finding now, and especially with my own children, religion and that type of recognition of that connection. Al and I can talk about it. We grew up in the same neighborhood. We're both 75. We came out of strong churches. And, we would live that, knowing that God was obvious, that we would not be breathing if it were not for that connection and that existence. And I thought about that. And we've got to get back to that. Because it's fractured now. It's definitely fractured in the United States after George Floyd, after January 6th. I was in a white church. I live in Santa Fe, so there's not that many Blacks where I live. But I love my church. But after January 6th, I didn't know who to trust. So I had to leave. So it's a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of contradiction, and it's a challenge for people of color. Always has been. I think we are the epitome of Christians, period. Anyone that has experienced what we have experienced as a people, and we're still praising God and giving him all honor, that makes us exceptional people as far as I'm concerned. So welcome. Thank you. Sometimes we have guests and we just have to soak it all in because they're so powerful. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I guess, go ahead, Sister Dr. Elizabeth.
I just wanted to say, I know our time is probably running out, but I wanted to say that this is something I still feel very strongly about in South Africa. We haven't given enough credit and acknowledgement to the contribution of African Americans to the liberation movement here in South Africa. During the 80s, when we didn't have the confidence to write our own songs, when we discovered we could sing as groups of friends, we started gospel groups. And it was the African American gospel music and musicians that assisted us to find expression, to find voice, and I really want to say, maybe part of my parting words is a little compassion for yourself, please. You've done a lot. When I met Oliver, it was like a gift. You all have done so much, and that has given us you are the shoulders that we could stand on in terms of confidence. I find my confidence whenever I listen to you, and sometimes I think maybe part of the healing is to release I don't know what has not been, and just to embrace what Mom Brenda is just saying. We know that God is the air that we breathe, and so we use that as a resource, and we don't have to convince anybody to accept us or not accept us. And I think that's what I've seen my parents lived. They knew that they weren't accepted in the church where we grew up, in our country, and they decided that they would work with God and they would rear us in the way that we should go, which is a very uncertain. You have to be in alignment with God to figure out how do you direct, how do you hold a space for your child. And so today, like I said earlier, each one of us are, we are people that we've got direction, even in the most difficult experiences and decisions, life decisions we had to make. We can make that because of the inheritance that my parents have left in us. And so Mom Brenda and Bravada, all of you, you have left an inheritance in us.
Yeah. Thank
and
you
when
for
it was
those words.
when it was time for us, we write our own songs. There's a lot that has happened. And
Yeah.
so I still feel like, you have to come. You have to come and spend some time. When I come to the States, I want to spend time with you. I don't want to be in these spaces, these programs that I get to be invited to, and then, I don't really get to spend time with you. So thank you for all of your hard work and hard labor, and having gone through all the dehumanization, but you found your own humanity, and you created, and you continue to create. So thank you from my side, really. Thank you.
Thank you, sister, for joining us. And as I close the healing circle, just acknowledging that this has been a special moment in time where we've had affirmation, confirmation, acclamation that all of these good things are worth the fight. And with that, we say, join us again as we continue to fight for our own wellness. And sometimes we have to fight ourselves, but we fight for our own wellness and that of our babies and our community. And thank you all for coming today to the Healing Circle. Bye-bye.